The Brothers Karamazov, Book 2, Chapter 4. This chapter follows the chapter in which Zosima counseled 5 peasant ladies, each going through distressful, the most difficult of life's challenges, especially on a spiritual plane, mental illness, spiritual battles, grief, loss, anxiety, fear, worry, guilt, all of the things that plague Christian and non-Christians alike. These peasant women are all healed and counseled and prophesied to and miraculously helped by Father Zosima. And so this chapter 4, could not be a bigger contrast to the contrast before. Once, when I wore a younger man's clothes as a much younger man, I taught English in a third world country, and the host family that I stayed with didn't have enough money for basic maternal vitamins, didn't have enough money to even really feed me properly. And I was teaching students who didn't often have food enough to eat. And for the entire month that I taught in this third world country, the students all wore the one outfit every day that I taught them. People living in real poverty with real problems, not even enough money to buy a prenatal vitamin. I left the place, got on an airplane, eventually landed in Atlanta, in the international airport, and the first scene I witnessed as I exited the plane, as I deplaned, was a soccer mom yelling at a fast food employee because he had put too much or too little ice into her soda. And there I had just spent months with some of the happiest people I had ever met, who were going through real tragedy, real poverty, real hunger, real physical pain, real anguish and suffering, and they were happy and joyful. And here is this rich, spoiled, elitist American woman, and she is yelling because she has too much or too little ice in her drink. And that's kind of the contrast between Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. Real struggles with sort of upper class, white, first world type of problems. Now, this chapter is not that simple, though. It's not just a contrast between real problems versus baby problems. It also foreshadows many of the deeper spiritual conflicts that we'll see later in the novel. And they do so in a cartoon type of way. Now, I used to go to a Presbyterian church that is part of the liturgy. There was a children's sermon. And so you did your call to worship and your opening hymn, and then all the children of the church would come to the front of the church, and the pastor would give a tiny little lesson. The pastor would tell a story and then sort of give a moral of the story or a moral of the tale. And really what the pastor was doing was telling to children in a 3 or 4 minute simple way the same message that he would spend 40 minutes using more educated and advanced and theological ways of describing the exact same message that he gave to children. And so I think that this is almost exactly what Dostoevsky is doing. Here is sort of a cartoonish, a comic strip version of all the serious things that will develop later in the novel. And so when I say cartoonish or comic strip, I don't mean that they are to be taken lightly or as a joke, but they are to be kind of taken lightly. In other words, we are warming up to the harder hitting philosophical discussions that we will have later in the novel. And so perhaps putting these words almost in the sense of a children's sermon helps us understand and be prepared for when more serious discussions arise. And so there are really 5 sort of cartoonish or childish, childlike discussions that take place in this chapter. First, Zosima kind of gives his idea of what Christian existentialism is in the Dover Thrift edition. It's at the top of page 46, and Zosima is telling another monk that despite him the fact that he looks healthy, that he really is in poor health and knows that he will soon die. I know being better today, I know that's only for a moment. I understand my disease now thoroughly, Zosima tells the man. If I seemed so happy to, you could never say anything that would please me so much, for men are made for happiness, and anyone who is completely happy has a right to say to himself, I am doing God's will on earth. All the righteous, all the saints, all the holy martyrs were happy. And so this is a philosophical statement. Again, it's childlike, it's cartoonish, but it's basically what Zosima the saint believes. And that is, we are made for happiness. The only way to attain to that happiness is to begin to practice the Christian faith. And if you find yourself on the path of joy, if you find yourself happy, then you know that Christianity is true. So there are no prior principles by which we can understand. There is no way we can reason ourselves. There is no way we can rationalize. There's no empirical proof to get to God. We have to just start practicing the faith. And we practice the faith through simplicity, truthfulness, and love. And as we practice love, as we practice simplicity in truth, we understand that we are happy. And so the only way to really come to the truthfulness of Christianity is to be a Christian in the first place. And so what is true is what works. What is true is what produces joy and happiness. And so Zosima can reason and say, I'm happy, therefore I am on the right path. I'm happy, therefore I am doing God's will. I'm happy, therefore Christianity is true. Now again, this is a childlike, cartoonish example or explanation of Christian existentialism, yet it helps our brains get started. So that is number one, Zosima's explanation of Christian existentialism. But then Madame Khokhlakov has a cartoonish child explanation of atheism. This is not the serious, hard-hitting religious questions that we'll get from Ivan later in the novel. This is more of a society lady just having these cliche objectives to Christianity. She heard someone at the salon. She heard someone while she was getting cocktails or martinis give these religious objections. And so these are sort of baby atheist kind of arguments. Here's what she says to Zosima, still on page 46. I suffer from lack of faith. Not a lack of faith in God. I dare not even think of that. But here's what I lack faith in. The future life. It is such an enigma, and no one can solve it. Listen, you are a healer. You are deeply versed in the human soul, and of course, I dare not expect you to believe me entirely. But I assure you on my word of honor that I'm not speaking lightly now. The thought of life beyond the grave distracts me to anguish, to terror, and I don't know to whom to appeal, and have not dared to all my life. And now I am so bold to ask you, O God, what do you think of me now? She can't believe in the supernatural. She can't believe in the everlasting. She can't believe in eternity. And again, this is something that will, in the lips of a more serious person later in the novel, and a deeper philosophical way, will be expressed later in the novel. Dostoevsky is getting us ready. So he's defined Christian existentialism in a childlike manner, and now he's described unbelief, not in God, but unbelief in eternality and a spiritual realm after this life in a sort of cliche childlike way. Now, how does Zosima answer this objection? Number 3, page 47, this is his answer to Madame Khokhlakov's lack of belief in eternal life. There's no proving it, though you can be convinced of it. So remember that for Zosima and for his student, his disciple, Alyosha. Listen to the distinction Zosima just made. No doubt there's no proving it, though you can be convinced of it. So he makes a distinction between proof and convincing. There's no such thing as proof, but there is being convinced in Zosima's mind. How? By the experience of active love. Strive to love your neighbor actively and indefatigably, without fatigue. In as far as you advance in love, you will grow surer of the reality of God and of the immortality of your soul. If you attain to perfect self-forgetfulness in the love of your neighbor, then you will believe without doubt, and no doubt can possibly enter your soul. This has been tried. This is certain. So first, number one, Dostoevsky gave us a cartoonish version of Christian existentialism. Number two, of a cartoonish version of unbelief. And now three, the cartoonish answer to unbelief, which is this. Active love is the answer. Speculation is not the answer to the problem of unbelief. Instead, active love is. And how does he define active love? As perfect self-forgetfulness. Now think about Zosima's advice, perfect self-forgetfulness, as synonymous with active love, which is what the Christian faith comes down to. Think about that description, perfect self-forgetfulness, and contrast that with 2 chapters ago. And Fyodor's buffoonery, Fyodor's play acting, in his 8 cringeworthy statements, and the chapter before that, chapter 1 of book 2, his 5 cringeworthy statements. What did they all have in common? Everything was about him and about his buffoonery and about his play acting and how everything was affecting him. And Zosima is teaching the exact opposite of that, of a perfect self-forgetfulness. You see the difference between the aged Fyodor, and everything is about him, and he's this black hole where everything comes back to him, but it's never enough to fill his soul. In the contrast with our previous chapter in Zosima with those 5 women, or those 5 groups of women. Everything was about them and healing them and giving words of comfort to them. Zosima is telling this rich upper class Madame Khokhlakov that the answer to all your questions aren't found in speculation. They're not even really found in philosophy or in books. Instead, the answers to your questions are found in active, hard, non-glorious, never giving up, every day, no credit, no attention for your love, active, self-forgetting love. How does she respond? She says, oh, well, I could never be like that. I'm not a person who loves. Whenever I love people in order to get some praise for loving people. And then she says, look how introspective, look how deep, and also look how humble I am, because I know that about myself. I don't have a Christ-like love. I don't think that I'm a believer, because I could never have a perfect love like the one you're preaching. And Zosima sees right through that, and he says, listen, like I told myself in chapters before, like I told Fyodor when he was acting and playing the fool, you can't lie to yourself. You know that you're not really a deep person. You know that you're not telling the truth right now. You know that you didn't just come to the realization that you can only love people and get something in return. You're just saying that because you want to seem like this introspective person. But your introspection is every bit of an act as Fyodor is putting on. And he says, don't do that. The key to Christian existential love is threefold: simplicity, active love, and truthfulness, chiefly a truthfulness to oneself. And so that is that's his answer. And then he gives an illustration of what he's saying. The bottom of page 47 and 48, he recalls a conversation he once had with a doctor. The doctor said this to him. "I love humanity," he said, "but I wonder at myself. The more I love humanity in general, the less I love man in particular." And then he talks about in his dreams, he has all these schemes to do great things. In other words, Zosima says, here's the thing. There's the idea of love versus actual love. Now we know a little bit about this, that term for those on social media who are very active in posting things about social justice issues, and really the only good they do is just posting things about social justice. There's no actual movement on their part, and there's even a name for that called slacktivism, where you can post on social media all day long about the things you believe, but there's no actual doing of anything that actually helps a person. You just post things all day long, and yet there's someone in your household that you have a terrible relationship. You have a friend, a former friend that you have a terrible relationship with. In other words, it's really easy to talk in these generic or universal or bookish or academic ways about the concept or the idea of love. And this doctor that Zosima once talked to, and then now this story is being related to Madame Khokhlakov by Zosima, is this. It's really, really easy to talk about loving people. And you know what? It's a distraction to make yourself feel better, to think about love and think about all these grand gestures, and to think about becoming a monk or a nun, to think about all these glorious sacrificial things you're going to do. And it's much harder than posting on Twitter about social justice. You know what's much harder than that? Loving your roommate, loving your spouse, loving your child that you live with. That active love is the key. And these delusions of grandeur, these delusions of saving the world, all they are is really a distraction and a lying to oneself. If you want to come to truth, start loving people. If you want to love people, start telling yourself the truth. And then in that simple experience of loving truthfulness, truthful loving, you will believe. You'll believe in God. And when you believe in God, you'll believe in eternal life. And you really will be an introspective person, but your introspection will not end in yourself. You'll look out from yourself and turn to others and to God in active, self-forgetful love. So again, like we've said 2 times already, these are cartoonish, childish versions of foreshadowing the deeper philosophical conversations that will be had later in the book. So Zosima's responses to this woman who is not a deep woman, who's just probably more likely repeating skeptical arguments in sort of this cliche magazine type fashion, yet Zosima's answers give us a preview of how we are to think when someone who is more serious, more skeptical, who is a deeper person who is actually struggling with some of these issues. It allows us to already be prepared to think WWZS. What would Zosima say? WWZT. What would Zosima think? And Dostoevsky wants us to basically follow the elder's advice in the face of Ivan's skepticism. Now, that was all fun stuff, and just a few things to clean up some of the who's and why's and what for. Madame Khokhlakov and her daughter Lise, they will be picked up sooner rather than later in the story. They are important characters to remember who they are. Madame Khokhlakov, this society lady with money and prestige and position, and her kind of immature 14-year-old daughter who goes between flirting and hiding and joking and being serious with Alyosha. You need to remember who they are and what did they come to do. Yes, talk to Father Zosima, but Madame Khokhlakov is also holding a note from someone named Katerina, and it's an important note, and the note doesn't give any details at all. It just asks for Alyosha to come visit Katerina. So these are all important things to keep in mind. Madame Khokhlakov, Lise, and Katerina are all major players in the story going forward. So it's important to remember that.